We will forego the roll, and the clerk can make note that everybody is present. There is no flag salute on the agenda tonight, but I think we should start with one. So let's, if you'll stand, join me with the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. This time. So if you'll bear with me for a minute, here we will get this thing underway. Okay. Then we can do that.
We actually have 10,000.
I don't know if that's on there. Just a second. Bear with me.
I'll have to check that out.
All right. If there are no, here, before we approve the agenda, let's make a change to the agenda. I'm told by our city attorney we can. There are a number of you here tonight that are concerned about the algae and about the milfoil. And since those two topics are on the agenda, we can allow comments on those two topics, or only on topics that are on the agenda. So, with that modification, if there are no. City Clerk?
I need to make up some kind of sign-in sheet.
You want paper?
Yeah, please.
Oh, okay. So, because this is a slight change, then we're going to ask that if you're going to speak, that you either before you speak or after you speak, you sign in, please. And it is limited to what is on the agenda. If it's not on the agenda tonight, you're not allowed to comment. So if other than that modification is, if there are no objections, the agenda will stand approved as modified. Hearing none, the agenda will stand approved as modified. So again, you can comment as long as the item is on the agenda tonight.
Okay.
So this is a time that we normally would have comments. So anybody wishing to speak on an item on the agenda? Yes, sir. Well, that's fine, as long as it's on the agenda, yes. So if you'd like to come up and state your name and address, and then once you're through, if you would go and sign the sheet. And other people wishing to speak on items on the agenda, the sheet appears to be ready, so if you want to go sign, that would be wonderful. Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to address the council and the citizens of Kenmore. My name is John Adamski. I live at 5906 Northeast Arrowhead Drive in Kenmore. Tonight's council meeting agenda includes a discussion of methods to control the invasive water weeds like milfoil and Elodia along the Kenmore shoreline of Lake Washington. Let me say that I enthusiastically support this effort, as do all of the lakeshore neighbors that I've talked to about it. The milfoil and the Elodia have infested much of the lake shoreline, significantly reducing the recreation value of the lake. Another part of the lake water quality problem is algae. The algae in Lake Washington comes in two varieties: a non-toxic green algae that has been growing in the summer season just within the last 2 years, and blue-green algae that has been growing in the fall, winter, and spring following those 2 summers. The non-toxic green algae attaches to aquatic weeds to form large area thick green mats along the shoreline of the Sammamish River and out into the lake several hundred yards on both sides of the river mouth. These mats are unsightly and smelly, but relatively harmless. The blue-green algae can be extremely toxic. We've had 12 outbreaks of toxic algae in a little over a year. The latest outbreak was on January 18th of this year, and covered a large area from Inglewood along the shore towards Arrowhead. Algae toxicity of 108 micrograms per liter was measured by King County Environmental Laboratory. That's 18 times in excess of the state standard for safety for pets and individuals. I've had a number of discussions with King County environmental scientists and State Department of Health and Ecology scientists concerning the causes of the algae outbreak. And although the specific cause of the outbreak remains unclear, factors such as the warm, dry summers, the low water flow in the Sammamish River, and excess nutrients from fertilizer and farm waste are suspect contributors. We don't know if the non-toxic green algae and the toxic algae growth cycles are directly linked, but the two compete for the same nutrients, and the toxic algae growth cycle starts just as the non-toxic green algae dies out and decays. And it was observed in a dramatic photo taken in December 2014 by Kenmore Air that the toxic algae scum appears to flow south from the river mouth. All of the toxic algae events at Arrowhead have occurred in the presence of a northerly wind. It looks like that stuff is blowing in, and that could transport the scum down the lake to other places such as Matthews Beach. We want to control the milfoil and the Elodea, and we want to better understand the green algae and the toxic algae so we can manage the lake ecosystem for better water quality. We have a lake ecosystem that is highly interdependent, and we don't want to trigger some unforeseen result. What if a toxic algae outbreak occurs because we have killed off the aquatic weeds that it competes with for nutrition? I would like to recommend two actions. First, I would like to recommend that the city engage with King County and the state water quality scientists to start a program of measurement and analysis to accompany city activity to control the water weeds. The measurement program would have the objective of understanding the lake ecosystem response through monitoring the nutrient and water quality conditions before, during, and after the treatment. Second, I'd like to recommend that the city develop an interactive online information system to inform citizens and allow citizen feedback on Lake Washington water quality. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Damsky. Anybody else wishing to be heard on an agenda item?
Patrick O'Brien?
Ms. Mooney, you need to sign up when you're finished.
Thank you. Elizabeth Mooney, 5934 Northeast 201st Street, Kenmore. I'm here tonight because yesterday we had a meeting, and that is where I met and had plenty of time to talk with the gentleman, Mr. John Adamski. Sorry, where? Adamski. And we had a discussion about the milfoil and the proposed spraying, and so that's why I'm here tonight, was to come comment and ask that, since we are still advocates for getting the shoreline tested and the waters, and to make sure that if there are hazards there, instead of people saying everything is fine, that we are able to help make sure everything is fine.
Let's be clear. We're talking about milfoil and
That's
algae,
right.
period.
That's right. So in terms of the concentrations of the chemicals that are being proposed for spraying, that's why I came in, just to say that our meeting yesterday led to meeting groups of people talking about the proposed actions, and so I'm here to say, could we please stay informed, and that we're interested in staying informed and knowing what's proposed and looking into the concentrations in the plan, and that PERC discussed this at our meeting yesterday. As far as causes, since this was brought up, one of the potential causes that just anecdotally came up at the meeting with these same folks that were there was the silt that comes out of the area next to the Kenmore Industrial Park and Kenmore Air, called, some people call it the birthing channel, where the barges go in there and churn up the sediment, and then it comes out in a plume into Lake Washington. So I'm just mentioning that as another potential cause for the blue-green algae blooms. But this is all, I think that's it for now. Other than that, we're looking forward to working together in the nonprofit with Mr. John Adamski. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mooney.
Patrick O'Brien, Elizabeth.
Patrick O'Brien, 6330 Northeast 181st Street. The algae is a significant issue since it can cause great illness or death. So it is advised that you post Log Boom Park and some other places with, limiting the access just to limit the city's vulnerability to, promoting water activities in a bad water environment. But I would be interested in knowing what chemicals are being proposed. Is the program you're going to undertake modeled after Green Lake, Juanita Beach? Is there any other place on Lake Washington or some of the surrounding water, small lakes, big lakes, that use chemical means? What are the chemicals? What are the risks? What's their longevity? And is there mechanical means? So could we weigh that against maybe they have some sort of a silt removing or a screen to take blue-green algae out? Because when they harvest blue-green algae, they use really fine mesh nets and can remove a lot that way. And like the other two people before me, they said it may be excessive nutrients. It could be temperature or thermal clean turnover, where the temperature of the lake turns over, the bottom stuff comes to the top, and the top stuff goes to the bottom. And it could be lack of oxygen. That's a possibility. So in-depth study of the causality, I think, is a good thing to do. And notifying the public on what sort of options you have would be really appreciated. Because if they said, oh, we have 6 different chemicals we use and could use, and here's a mixture of the cocktail we're going to use, and here's how far we plan on going with it, I think everybody that is on the lake or near the lake would like to know that. And if there is a mechanical means, then I would favor that, because it's much easier to deal with something that when you turn the machine off, the process stops, than the unknown consequences of any chemical you're going to add to that sensitive site. So thank you very much for taking those questions tonight.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Anybody else wishing to speak? Hearing none. Thank you all very much for your comments, Mr. Adamski. I really appreciate your persistence in this matter. I know this is something that you've been after for a few years, and I'm glad that we're finally at that point where we've gotten, I guess, some. Yes.
I would like to speak.
Okay, you'll need to sign up when you're finished. So come forward.
I've been, my name is Barrett McAllister, 5839 5830 Kenmore, Washington, 98028. I had a stroke, so this is what it's a little bit.
You're doing just fine.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anyway, I really, really like our lake, and I've been swimming it for 57 years, and my husband and I moved down in a very small cabin at Arrowhead Point, and we sort of fell in love with the lake, and we swam, and all our kids have been swimming, and all our grandchildren have been swimming, and they're all in Kenmore area, and they stayed in the Kenmore area. And I just want to let you know, this last time, this 4th of July, I did not invite them or my friends to come to the lake because it was polluted, and I was, also I couldn't swim by our house because it was so much seaweed. And I'm a very strong person and strong swimmer, but that was not what I could do anymore. So please think about that you can do something for the lake and also take away the seaweed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McAllister. And if you would, yes, please just go over and sign in. I'd appreciate it. So anyway, thank you very much for your comments. I know that we are certainly a top item on our agenda tonight, and I hope that we will have some information for you. Ms. Mooney and Mr. O'Brien, I suggest you talk with the city manager. The treatments that we have been certainly approved by the state, and it's a recognized method of eradication, or certainly limited control. And so anyway, city manager.
Yeah, and a lot of those questions and concerns will be discussed in tonight's presentation.
Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And I'll second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent agenda stands approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda is business agenda. Aquatic weed discussion. Mr. Carlindsey and Brennan Jernigan.
Thank you, Your Honor. As you know, that one of the City Council's top goals is public access to the water, increasing that and improving it. And we have several public access points to Lake Washington, but we have been having aquatic weed problems with those access points. And so for quite some time now, we've been researching different options and looking at different ways on how to address the aquatic weed problem in the publicly accessible areas. And Brendan Jernigan and also an intern before him did quite a bit of research on it. And I'll let Brennan take it from here, and he'll introduce the guests that we have here tonight to help walk us through this discussion.
Yes, seated here with me to my right, well, good evening, Mayor and Council. To my right is seated Terry McNabb, who is an aquatic biologist and manager with Aquatechnics, which is a licensed aquatic herbicide applicator. And to my left is Ben Peterson, who is an aquatic noxious weeds specialist for King County for the Noxious Weed Control Program. So these two are here today to inform us a little bit more about the problem as it stands here, specifically with regard to the aquatic weeds. I know there's been some discussion about algae, but we still don't know fully what those causes are, and we'd like to have that discussion further. But tonight will be the main focus on the aquatic weeds and how to manage those. So I'm going to turn some time over to Ben Peterson, who will talk a little bit about the state of the situation, what weeds we have and where they are, and then we'll give the time over to Terry McNabb to talk about control methods, and then there will be question and answer afterward.
All right.
We can get the PowerPoint up to, or the screen, sorry.
Okay, so I'm the aquatic noxious weed specialist for King County. My focus is specifically on aquatic noxious weeds throughout the county. Spend most of my time working on shoreline weeds, but do know a lot about submerged weeds and floating leaf weeds. So the focus of this short talk is about plants. Not really about algae, but I may be able to answer questions later on that. All right. So there are several key impacts of aquatic noxious weeds. Obviously, water body ecology. They displace native plants, form monotypic stands. They can affect water quality. They can lead to increased water temperature and lower oxygen levels. These are both detrimental to salmon. They can provide a nucleus for the filamentous green algae that John spoke of earlier. They can impede float plane and boat movement in industrial areas. And the big impact, I think that this focus of this short talk is the impact to recreation, impede paddle sports, motorboats, fishing, eliminate fishing opportunities, can make things really dangerous for swimming. Next slide. This is just sort of a generalized schematic of the impact of aquatic noxious weeds, which can form a monoculture, compared to a diverse aquatic plant mix. And this is sort of what you would see in the littoral zone. The littoral zone is the zone of the water where light can reach the bottom of the lake. So in the clear parts of Lake Washington, that can be up to 15 feet deep or deeper, coming out from shore, several hundred feet. In some of the smaller lakes around here with dark water, it can maybe only be 5 feet deep. But in Lake Washington, the littoral zone, the zone where plants can grow, can be pretty broad. Next slide. So briefly, I'm going to talk about the two plants that are likely the focus of the aquatic weed control that's being considered for this year. One really common weed is called Eurasian water milfoil. This is native to Europe and Asia, and it's one of the most widespread aquatic pests in North America. It reproduces by plant fragment, so every time a boat cuts through the plants, every time they're disturbed, little fragments of the plant can spread around and create new plants. It can lead to increased water temperature, potentially increased algal growth, reduce biodiversity, and it's a big hindrance to recreation. It can fill up the water column, can grow up to 15 to 20 feet deep almost, and it tops out midsummer. You can sort of see some images of it there. Next slide. And the other main plant that's growing in this area in the littoral zone is Brazilian elodea in terms of noxious weeds. You can sort of see images of it there. It looks sort of like the standard aquarium plant, and that's sometimes how it gets moved to new water bodies, like through an aquarium dump. It also gets caught on rudders and boat trailers. Like milfoil, this plant can fill up the water column and water up to 20 feet deep, and it also spreads by fragments and impedes boating and fishing, things like that. All right, next slide. So this is just sort of a quick map of where these plants have been surveyed and found in the Kenmore area. This is definitely not an all-inclusive survey. It likely extends down the shore, down to Arrowhead Point and further. And these plants both occur upstream, up the Sammamish River, and in Lake Sammamish. So there is the potential, for more plant fragments to come downstream. But they are heavily infested along Log Boom Park, in the aquatic areas, and where people do a lot of recreation. I think that's it for now. And I'll be available to answer more questions later.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Terry McNabb. I work for a company called Aquatechnics. We have a number of offices up and down the West Coast, and we primarily help cities, units of government, or private lake associations deal with algae and aquatic weed and nutrient in the water type issues. So we've been doing it for about 35 years or so. We've had some interaction, I think, with your previous interns. They've called and asked us a few questions about some of the different technologies that are available. At this point, a couple months ago, they asked us to maybe start giving them some feedback on what options were available from a chemical control standpoint. So what they asked me to talk about tonight was just kind of a quick overview of what the toolbox is, chemical and non-chemical, for dealing with these things, and know what the process is of how they're registered with the various agencies, and what the permitting process might look like if you decide that's a tool you want to select and kind of move forward with. So Brendan covered most of this is a picture of a bay a little bit south of here on Hunts Point, previous to in May, before the plants grow up. These plants, like Eurasian milfoil, can grow up to a foot a week. and they can top out in 20 to 25 feet of water. You can see there's only one species of plant in there. They replace the native vegetation. They have a pretty detrimental impact on the environment. They replace all the insects and things that have evolved to live on the native vegetation go away. There's a lot of water quality things that change that make it hard for fish to live there. So why you're doing control is really just a function of, trying to maintain navigation. There's been a number, if you Google Eurasian milfoil and drowning, if you have a minute or two here and there, you'll find that there are a number of cases each year where that occurs. One thing you maybe don't think of so much is a lot of the beaches, even if there's lifeguards there, if someone goes off, we've had a situation where we've seen where a little kid went off a dock, the lifeguard saw him, but it took him 15 or 20 minutes to find him in the vegetation, and by that time, it was just too late. So there are some real human safety things to think about when you're dealing with beaches, especially. Commerce, the float planes are big here. In addition to impacting the float plane, being impacted in their operations, these plants spread by fragment. And there's up in Alaska especially, they're starting to see that the invasive weeds are flying all over the place and landing in lakes that maybe wouldn't even have a boat ramp and that type of thing. So there are valid reasons to consider control options. I should have let you do this. I'm just going to, I think you already kind of focused on that, so I'll just get into some of the options. So as aquatic plant managers, we have 4 or 5 different types of tools. We have limited biological control tools. We have mechanical operations we can use. We do a lot of work with diver dredging and bottom barriers and things like that. And I'm just going to kind of briefly run through why your group kind of looked at some of these things. And I don't want to say I guess they looked at them and maybe thought they weren't the best option. But basically, the smaller sites are real applicable for things like bottom barriers. We use these a lot for city saddle beaches, around docks, places like that. It's a mat that's placed on the bottom. It's attached to the bottom. The divers are usually used to install these things, and they basically just put you in a situation where aquatic plants just plain flat can't grow. So they give you 100% control. You place them. You can see the diver there kind of rolling them across the weed beds. There's a permit required. They have to be moved every couple of years, and they're extremely effective, but the limiting factor basically is cost. It can cost up to $1 a square foot to buy these materials and place them, and there's about 43,000 square feet in an acre. And if you're looking at talking, 10, 20, 30 acres, just a lot of times there's cost prohibitive. Physical removal is another thing that's used quite often by homeowners. Again, it's very effective when it's done well. It's expensive. It's it's just got a few drawbacks that on a larger scale make it kind of impractical. Diver dredging is another technology we use quite a bit of. We did a little bit of this work on Silver Lake up north of here a number of years ago in the 90s for the city of Everett. Again, it's extremely effective, but it's extremely costly. You have to pay divers. There's teams that are in the water. A number of people have to be around to comply with L&I, and there's prevailing wage issues and types of things that drive the cost up. So, again, it's a very effective tool, but it's just cost prohibitive. For those of you that may remember Seattle Metro, that was the agency that King County absorbed in the 90s. In the 1980s, they started a harvesting program on Lake Washington, and after 2 years, they asked us to take it over for them, and we managed it for about, I guess, until they died, whenever that was, in the mid-90s, when they were absorbed by King County. So aquatic plant harvesting equipment, it's very effective in terms of, short-term control. These are big lawnmowers. They just go back and forth. They cut the vegetation. Their production rates are governed by how far they have to go to get rid of this stuff. And on a lake like Lake Washington, that it's generally, you fill a harvester up in 15 minutes, and it takes an hour for it to go someplace and unload it. So, again, kind of cost prohibitive. These things also tend to catch fish. They actually catch little fish as bycatch. So a lot of people maybe think they don't have environmental impact, but in a lot of cases they can. So that's one more thing they looked at and I guess moved past.
Hey, Terry, also with those harvesters, on your slide I noticed you mentioned fragmentation, and that was a downside that we noticed as well, is the harvesters can't collect all of the pieces of the weed and often leave pieces behind, and you mentioned that that's how the weeds spread, is through fragmentation. So that was what we saw as a downside to the harvester. Is that correct?
It can be, yeah. They catch 95% of what they pick up, but the paddle wheels can break things off. But these plants auto-fragment anyway. The boats are fragmented, but they do, it's a significant thing. And, one milfoil fragment, floats for about a day or two. It grows roots, it sinks, and starts a whole new colony. So it's kind of, it's kind of an issue. There are really no biological control tools we have that are permittable in this state. We use triploid grass carp quite often in golf course ponds and places like that. The state will not allow them in a natural lake system like Lake Washington. And if they were to go in there, you'd have containment issues. You can't, you can throw one grass carp in and it'll eat all day and you'll never see a difference. If you put enough in to cure your problem, you basically eat all the vegetation in the lake, and they have feeding preferences, and unfortunately milfoil is very low on the list. There's also been a weevil that people have looked at for milfoil, and it's really it's had some success here and there in nature, but they've never really been in a situation where they've been able to augment stocking of these things and come up with any reasonable control. And the milfoil weevil would only be effective on milfoil. You've got two different species out there, so that's kind of where that goes. In terms of aquatic herbicides, they go through a process at the Environmental Protection Agency that's real similar to the USDA in terms of how they register drugs. A company that manufactures an aquatic herbicide today has to devote about 15 years of research and about between $20 and $30 million to get a yes or no decision on whether they can ever sell it. So they don't start down the path of trying to register something that they can never recover the economics from. So the first step in terms of protecting the environment is there's a real rigorous registration process that any manufacturer has to go through to get a product approved to place in water. And the reason for that is water is real three-dimensional. It can be a drinking water supply, it can be an irrigation supply, people are swimming in it. It's a lot different than a registration you might have for something that you use on a lawn or more of a two-dimensional thing. So that's kind of the first level of protection. The second level of protection in our state, the Washington Department of Ecology has a permitting program. And the permitting program is supported by an environmental impact statement specific to each one of the products that they allow to be used under their permit. So their permit has looked at all these things. The environmental impact statements have looked at all the potential issues. If they think there's an issue, the permit is conditioned by how you can use it and where you can use it and timing windows and things like that. So there's a real rigorous system that you'd have to go through if you decided that this was a technology you wanted to move forward with. There are a number of different EPA registered products that we use commonly that are approved for use in lakes. A lot of them are approved for use directly in potable water reservoirs. We do a lot of control work against toxic algae, for example, in water supplies for places like the city of Los Angeles. Again, there's two levels of oversight before you apply for a permit, and then the permit regulates additional safety to the environment if you choose to go forward with this types of thing. The permit they use in this state's an NPDES permit. It's a general permit that Ecology developed. They just reissued it. It's issued every 5 years. They just reissued it again. Oh, actually, it's going to be issued again in a couple of weeks. And that permit basically is the tool book or the rule book you follow if you're going to proceed with one of these technologies. In order to get coverage, you have to file a notice of intent. That's something that the city can do if you choose to go forward. It takes about 60 days to get the permitting process underway. There's a discharge management plan that's put together. There's mapping that's done. I mentioned there's a number of different tools we use based on what species are present and what timing conditions there might be for those types of things. There is a comment period that's required by the permit. We have to, whoever files it has to publish a public notice so people have an opportunity to comment on the specific project that you're thinking about. And then if it does move to the point where you're going to do any application work, there's additional requirements in the permit to notify people in terms of 10-day prior at least delivery of information and that type of thing. So aquatic plant survey work, this is something that's critical. Conditions change from year to year. Different products that we use are effective on different species. So if areas heavily impacted with Eurasian milfoil, we have some tools that we can selectively target that plant with. If it's Brazilian elodea, there's some other things. And we can protect some of the, a lot of these things give us the capability to protect the lower growing, non-problematic native plants. So we have a couple mapping technologies we use to do that. Costs involved, basically the permit costs approximately $2,000, out of which about $500 is a permitting fee, there's a couple legal notices that are required. There's an annual fee that has to be paid to ecology to maintain your permit coverage, whether you decide you're going to do anything the following year or not, and you may not have to. You may have results the first year. And then treatment costs per acre, or systemic herbicides are basically things that will translocate, target the entire plant. Contact herbicides are more things that are faster acting, but maybe are more of a one-season type deal. We currently hold permits on Lake Washington, I think, everywhere you see a blue dot. We work for the City of Hunts Point, went through the process you guys are considering, where they developed an integrated aquatic plant management plan. They got funded the Department of Ecology a number of years ago. We work for the City of Medina, the Bellevue Arts, City of Renton, and University of Washington, and a Save Union Bay Association, and a number of other groups. So this isn't something that's unique to Lake Washington. There's quite a bit of work that's already been done for a number of years, and I think there's a pretty good track record of safety to the environment, that type of thing. If you're going to move forward with the treatment, you have to basically outline the areas you're going to target. You have to provide the business and residential notice. There's some shoreline posting that's done, and then the application takes place, and then monitoring. Well, there's water quality monitoring that's done to kind of track dissolved oxygen and a couple other parameters. So that's kind of the end of the talk. I did throw an algae slide in here just to make a couple comments on blue-green algae. This is something that's really taken off across the country. Lakes are becoming more and more impacted by these things. As blue-green algae produce a couple of, one's a real potent neurotoxin and another kind of acute liver toxin. There's also some evidence they produce a couple of chronic things that may lead to things like ALS and Alzheimer if exposure happens over any length of time. And these things have a competitive advantage in lakes that are richer in nutrients, and we're seeing more and more of this just because there's more and more, the lakes are the lowest point in the watershed. Nutrients have been coming into these areas for years. They accumulate, and at some point these things have a competitive advantage. A couple just quick points there. It's hard to deal with something like that on a localized basis. If you think about algae cells, they're not like a rooted weed. They're a single-celled organism. They have to get the nutrients they need dissolved in the water column. So if you've got a set level of nutrients pretty much lake-wide, then it's a lake-wide problem. There are some things you can do selectively to give people relief at the short term. One of the products we use for that is a peroxygen-based algicide, which is basically, it oxidizes, it breaks down to oxygen and water. It also kind of kills the toxin. That can be applied under the same permit. In smaller lake systems, we do a lot of work where we target phosphorus with things like aluminum sulfate or Phoslock, and that basically prevents these things from taking off. So I tried to give a 1-hour talk in 10 minutes, and I almost made it. So I guess if you have any questions for us, we'd be happy to handle them. And
questions? Councilmember Smith.
Good evening. Thanks for your presentation. I have a couple of questions and then possibly some more depending on what the other council has. First question, it has to do with something you touched on at the very end of your talk, Mr. Peterson. Could you tell us, is the blue-green algae problem, first of all, is that localized to this area at the north end of the lake, or is that a lake-wide problem?
From what I understand, is you're probably getting the stuff accumulates downwind. So if you have a set number of blue-green algae cells, diluted through the whole volume of Lake Washington, you may not even see it. And if they are producing toxins, you're not going to be at a level where they're even detectable. But if you start getting things blown to one end or another, that's probably what's going on here. I think the prevailing winds kind of come out of the south, and at certain times of the year, you're probably just getting wind-driven, stuff piling up on your end of the lake.
Okay, thank you. And then kind of following up on that, with the treatments that the herbicide treatments that you discussed, do you see either a treatment? Do you see a treatment having either a positive or a negative impact on not just the weeds, but the blue-green algae as well?
Aquatic plants are about 90 to 95% water. They don't contain much in the way of nutrients, and they die off every year and decompose and re-release everything anyway. So I don't see that they'd, especially at the level you're doing it here, that they'd have any kind of contribution one way or another. Whatever the nutrients are tied up in there, they're basically harvesting nutrients that are already there through their root systems. They use it to grow. If you leave them alone, they die at the end of the year, they decompose, all that stuff just gets released back into the environment. If you're treating them, a lot of times there's less biomass there, so you're actually, there isn't as much there that's available to release it, but I don't think it's significant, and I think there's a lot of data that probably shows that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sperry.
Well, thank you. That was a lot. I think you've really kind of already answered my question, because my question basically is, so we do something so that these plants die, then, how do we make sure that that doesn't fuel more of a problem?
In a lake like Lake Washington, like smaller lakes, we've eradicated things like Eurasian milfoil, and 100-acre lake where the economics make sense. On a lake like this with all these jurisdictions, you're almost more of a, you have to think of it, I think, more of a maintenance thing. We're maintaining open water or protecting these beneficial uses. And if the consensus of the community is that this is a problem, that we need to maintain these beneficial uses, then these, out of the toolbox, from an economic standpoint and an effectiveness standpoint, I guess, these chemistries are probably the most, the best tool you've got in the toolbox. And does that answer your question, or did I kind of...
No, that's helpful. And that was my other question about the maintenance. So really, we're not looking at a one-time, this is going to all go away. It's really...
It really depends. I don't think there's the mapping of this. What really needs to happen is you have to look at, these are the areas we want to look at for a treatment standpoint. Then they have to know what species are there. And that helps you pick a herbicide if you decide a herbicide is the best option. If it's Eurasian milfoil, we've got a couple of techniques that will control the systemic. They'll translocate, they'll kill the whole roots, that plant will be gone. If it's Brazilian Elodea, we've got a couple technologies that'll do that as well. But over time, things can, you're going to have fragments coming down the river, but you can take it and reduce it from, the first year down, maybe 90% the second year, and then, spot treat or leave it alone if it's not. Those are the kind of decisions you can make down the road.
Thank you.
Councilmember Danuski.
In cities where you've treated for the weeds, have you seen any correlation with the blue-green algae being helped or hurt, or is there no correlation?
No, I don't think there's I think that's a lake-wide, it's a phosphorus level that's lake-wide is what's driving that in my mind. I think it's just, in your case, it's probably just blowing down here in the summer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
A couple of questions or comment. First, the mechanical mowing of the milfoil, it might leave a few fragments away and you get the bulk of it out when you do it, but like any plant that you prune, when you do that, you get two shoots coming up from where it's cut. So you get double the growth after you cut it that way. So often it isn't, from what I understand, isn't worthwhile. The chemical, the herbicides, it's hard for me to understand how they can specifically affect milfoil or the elodea and not affect other natural plants. You feel there's no ill effect to the natural plants that are also there and the other life forms?
Well, the first thing, if you think about animals versus plants, the herbicides basically are focused on some process like photosynthesis that doesn't exist in animals. Mm-hmm. So these things, 9 times out of 10, there's a huge, like for example, if you're a company trying to register an insecticide, insecticide works on an animal nervous system. There's a lot more potential to impact, people or dogs or whatever. These things focus on, chlorophyll, or they focus on some processes in a plant. And the science is really there to the point where, for example, Eurasian milfoils in the broadleaf plant family. There's kind of 2 types of plants, broadleaf and grass family. milfoil's in the broadleaf family, and a couple of the products we use are target specific to broadleaf plants. So if you put them in an area where you've got an understory of native pondweeds and choked out with milfoil, it doesn't even touch the pondweeds because it doesn't function on that. It's like there's chemicals you can put on your lawn, for example, it'll kill a dandelion that's a broadleaf and it won't touch your grass, the same kind of thing. So those technologies exist, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Something to add. So also, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has very stringent timing windows as to when certain aquatic herbicides can be used to lessen their impact on the fish. So that's something that a contractor would definitely have to follow, and something that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has taken into account.
So there might be an effect on the fish.
Not necessarily. What they've looked at in their EIS is they've looked at things like, well, here's a good example. There's one product we use called Diquat that's registered as it's a herbicide. There's a fish timing window for it from, I think, July 15th to the end of the summer. But the same exact thing is also used in fit salmon hatcheries as a therapeutic drug for baby salmon to kill a couple gill diseases at 10 times the rate you put it out in the lake. So the timing windows, I think, they're just trying to minimize. It's part of the permit. What they've done is they're developing the permit. They say, what can we do to protect fish and salmon? And a large number of the products we use have no fish timing window. If there's a product that they have a concern about, there is one. And the stuff would probably be used up here is really not subject to a fish timing window because they feel there's no impact on fish.
Council, any other questions? Councilmember Smith.
Since you referred to this as a maintenance issue rather than an eradication issue, I'm curious, is there any known adverse impacts from a cumulative effect of using the herbicide on an ongoing basis?
No, because that's what this whole EPA federal registration process looks at before they ever let anybody sell any of these things. In aquatics, it's the most rigorous testing that any product that's going to be a pesticide goes through at all, because it could end up in drinking water, it could end up in salmon bearing waters, things like that. So the things that are registered don't have any kind of residual. They're designed to do what they're going to do and break down rapidly and be at no detect levels almost within a day or two.
Okay, thank you. And prior to an application, do you start with any type of a baseline measurement and then you look at an objective that you're hoping to achieve, or do you just apply it and see what happens?
I'm going to flip back to a slide. This slide you're looking at here, we run two sampling things. You see there's a bunch of little dots there. We go to GPS points along transects and we map the species that are present there. And then the second bottom polygon you're looking at is a hydroacoustic system we use. The different colors you're seeing there are aquatic plant biovolumes. That's the percent of the water column that's filled with vegetation. So we do that pre-treatment and post-treatment, and we can duplicate it over the years to it gives us point intercept data that shows what species changes are there, and it gives us biovolume data that shows how we did, where it was started and where it reduced to, and that type of thing.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Any other council questions? Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda, 67th Avenue Northeast Corridor Improvements, project update. Ms. Overlease.
Probably have enough direction.
All right, how do I get it on? There we go. New program for me. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to be talking to you about the 62nd Avenue Northeast Corridor project. Before I do that, I'd like to introduce Nathan Anderson. He's our design engineer with KPFF that's helping us put this package together. So in July, KPFF's design contract was approved by Council, and then in August we started the design on the project. This particular project is going to be installing new sidewalks along 62nd Avenue Northeast in the vicinity of 181st Street to 187th Street. We will also be installing 3 traffic circles at the intersection of 182nd, 184th, and 185th Street. This project is also funded through the Highway Safety Improvement Program of $113,000. To date, we've been reaching out to the public on this project. We have presented the work that we're planning on doing with the Neighborhood Transportation Plan Program, where we've introduced the project to the folks who attended those meetings. And then I have sent out neighborhood notices twice to the folks in the general area. I've chatted with a few folks that live in the area, and so trying to keep people up to speed on this project. And we also have a project page on our website that shows this project and just gives a brief discussion of it. So when we first applied for the grant on this project, we had originally proposed installing the sidewalk along the west side of 62nd Avenue Northeast, along with the traffic signals as shown here. And since then, we've done a bit more investigation of the area and decided that it would be better to put the sidewalk on the east side of the street. So what we're showing here is State Route 522 is down here, and these are the sidewalk improvements that project will be constructing. And then we will be I lost my mouse. We will be taking up from there and then building sidewalks all the way along the east side of 62nd Avenue. We will still be installing the traffic signals at these intersections. Traffic circles? Yeah. What did I say? You said signals.
Oh, signals.
Sorry.
And then the improvements along this street, we're looking at doing sidewalks with an amenity strip. The next steps in this project are an open house, which we scheduled for February 29th. The notices have gone out to everybody, and we're hoping for a really good attendance on this one. I've already received some comments from folks on the project with support for the sidewalks on the east side versus the west side, so it sounds like it was a good choice for us to decide to do that. In the meantime, we'll be advancing the design to the next level, and then we're expecting project to be constructed somewhere in 2017. If there are any comments or questions, I'd be happy to hear them.
Comments, questions? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, could you describe the traffic circles? They're not roundabouts, but just a center circle that you have to go around to slow traffic down?
Yeah, the traffic circles are, for all intents and purposes, a really small roundabout. They're very small, and they're designed for people just to go around them to slow vehicles down. I don't know quite how large they're going to be. We haven't gotten yet that far, but they will most likely be.
Currently, we've looked at a 12-foot diameter circle, and that does appear to work for passenger cars to proceed counterclockwise. The larger vehicles, such as school buses and fire trucks, would actually cut through, turn left, instead of going around the typical way, which is normal for a traffic circle. But yeah, we're also looking at possibly smaller circles as well.
Is there any barrier in the center, or could one drive over it if?
It is mountable curb, but right now in the center, we're just proposing topsoil and no pavers or anything.
And I've had discussions with the school district about the traffic circles. Buses currently go down this street, and they were agreeable to relocating the bus routes around those if they couldn't get around the traffic circles.
So school buses drive over them?
Buses, the way the traffic circle is built, there's a ring around it that is mountable, that a vehicle, if it needed to, it could drive over that portion of it, and the buses could go over that if they needed to. That's how they're designed.
So a little different than the ones we're seeing down in Seattle, the ones that have been there forever.
Well, actually, they could go over top of the traffic circle, but the functional way that they would do it is to go the opposite of the typical counterclockwise. So if you're making a left turn, instead of going to the right around the circle and then proceeding to your left destination, you would just immediately go left when the street is clear.
So what if you're going straight through?
Oh, that turning movement is successful for a bus. It's just that left turn that a bus can't go all the way around the circle as a passenger car normally would.
But you can drive over it.
Yeah, you can drive over it, yeah.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Looks good.
Next item. Northeast 202nd Safe Routes to School project update. Ms. Overlease.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking to you about the Northeast 202nd Safe Routes to Schools project discussion. And before I do that, I'm got Daryl Smith with me. He's with Petite, who is helping us with the design. So Petite has been providing the design for us through our on-call agreement. We began design in October. The scope of this project consists of building new sidewalks along Northeast 202nd Street between 66th Avenue Northeast and approximately Northeast 198th Street, and on 66th Avenue Northeast between Northeast 202nd Street and Kenmore Junior High. We're also looking to install a bike lane along the south side of Northeast 202nd from the intersection to the project limits. We're also looking at doing improvements to the crossing in front of Kenmore Junior High. This project is also funded through the Safe Routes to Schools program in the amount of $814,000. So the project is located just north of City Hall at 68th Street, turns into Northeast 202nd Street. It goes from, this is roughly 198th to here and around to Kenmore Junior High. The sidewalk work that we're doing on 62nd Avenue Northeast is going to be on both sides of the street, redoing this corner here, and then coming down to this intersection. We're going to be looking at reconfiguring the intersection so that we get rid of this fly-through right turn and make vehicles actually stop and turn left, or turn right and turn left. We're also looking at opportunities to enhance the crossing at this location. One of the things that we're looking at doing is we have to do some safety measures, and we're also looking to provide more awareness to drivers that they're entering a school zone area. And one of the things that we're looking at is some opportunities to add some fun things to this project, since we already have to go in there and do something. And some of the things we're potentially looking at is some pavement treatments here, maybe some wayfinding signage, and then possibly working with Kenmore Junior High to incorporate their colors or their logo or something like that, just to make it look fun. So we're looking at maybe something here, possibly a seat wall, maybe some sort of signage on this side. We're still kind of noodling around with the idea, but that's something that we're interested in doing. Northeast 202nd Street, we've got 66th Avenue here. We will maintain the existing crosswalk here. The flashing beacons will still be in place once we're done, so they're not going anywhere. Then the sidewalk will continue along the south side of the street. We're also looking at an opportunity to provide some low-impact development on this project, so we're looking to install a bioswale along this face here, which will provide some water quality treatment to the stormwater. The project would then continue down the street, coming all the way to Northeast 201st Place, where we will be rebuilding these curb ramps and having an amenity strip along the sidewalk there. The bike lane is going to go the full distance all the way to roughly this location here at the cul-de-sac. One thing to point out, though, there is existing parking along here that's going to be impacted, and we're going to try and minimize it as much as possible, but we do need some of the space for the new sidewalks and for the bike lane. Our next steps with this project would be to have an open house, which we scheduled for March 8th. And in the meantime, we'll be advancing this design further along, and then we anticipate construction to be the summer of 2017 to coincide with summer break. And I'll take any comments if you have any.
Questions, comments? Councilmember Herbert.
Can you go back just a couple of slides? I had a question. One more. So on the south side there, it looks like there's a driveway, but I don't see anything behind it. What?
Right here?
What is that?
This is a driveway. There's a gravel access to this house here.
Oh,
so it
okay.
comes down here and connects to there.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And John, we have plenty of room so that we can avoid the dippy driveway entrances, right? We'll be able to maintain a flat surface at each driveway approach.
From this location, yes, we will be having the sidewalk in front of the driveway will be at the same elevation as the rest of the sidewalk. I don't believe we have any other locations. Yeah, they're all just like you explained, yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Councilmember Danuski.
I know it's not a arterial, but did you consider an RFB at the crossing in front of the school?
That is something that we are looking at in front of the school, yes.
Kind of a weird little corner, it's hidden. And
Yeah. One thing I did want to point out is there are a lot of trees in this area. And unfortunately, to build a sidewalk, some of those trees will have to come out. We have looked at a few of the trees, and we feel there's a safety issue with some of the cottonwoods that are there that we're going to be taking out. But we're going to be doing some more looks at which trees and how many trees need to come out, and then trying to see if there's any that we can save. But there are quite a lot here that are impacted.
Councilmember Curtis.
I would just comment on the loss of parking. I drive by there and live just down the street to the west. Not that many people park along there, and for the safety gain, I'd give up all the parking if we had to. It's scary to see the kids running along there.
And we can definitely look into that, yeah.
I'm really excited about this.
Councilmember Danuski.
Are we replanting any trees?
Right now, the plan is we're looking to maybe plant some trees in this space right here. We have to do some property acquisitions to build the sidewalk here, and so we're looking at possibly adding some trees. There is an opportunity to add trees along this amenity strip, but we haven't gotten that far yet to see if that's something we can do. There are currently utilities along this side that might be impacted by the placement of trees. So,
any other questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to try rephrasing this one here and see what kind of results I get. So next on the school zone cameras discussion. Mr. Schock. See, I knew I'd get Mrs. Overlease if I said the other name. I knew it.
Your Honor, while they're coming up, I just want to acknowledge John Vicente, because you may recall we hired him to be our bridge project engineer, and he's been able to fit in a whole bunch of other things too. So appreciate that, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, Council, Mayor Baker. Brett Schuck, I'm the City Traffic Engineer, and I have with me Chris Overlease, Public Works Director, and Police Chief Seether. And we're here to present an analysis of the Kenmore school zones. So a quick overview of tonight's presentation. I'll be describing exactly what a school zone is in terms of our engineering analysis of it. And then I'll be looking at the existing conditions, both physical conditions of our school zones and the operational analysis for vehicles and pedestrians. I will touch on the toolbox of measures that we have to address any concerns in school zones and touch on what we've already been using prior to this analysis. Be presenting a recommendation based on our analysis of the school zones, and I will make sure to mention a summary of the research that we did on one of the newest tools for our toolbox, which is automated enforcement. So first wanted to assess the conditions of each of the school zones just to establish a baseline so we know where we are. We needed to look at the vehicle speeds, the rate of collisions that we've had, and look at the unique physical environment of each school zone. And especially, we have some schools that are on some very high volume arterials. And this is just the elementary schools that was looked at for this analysis, as they're the ones with the flashing beacons, which is per the King County policy prior to our incorporation. So, defining a school zone for our engineering analysis. The Washington Administrative Code sets a distance of 300 feet on either side of a crosswalk, which accesses a school, and requires the presence of children for the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit to be enforceable as an active school zone. Kenmore's elementary school zone flashers are based on the school bell times, and those are adjusted each fall. Some of the schools do change 5-10 minutes here or there. So this is kind of a generic schematic of a school zone, just to demonstrate that on both sides, as traffic is approaching the main crosswalk, which defines the whole school zone, we have an inbound zone, which is the highest priority for safety. This is where we want to make sure that we're really looking at what the vehicles are doing, both in terms of speed and the other operating conditions in the school zone. There's also the actual crossing section, and then there's the outbound section, which is a lower priority, but that's kind of based on the school zone environment. In some locations, it's there's really not a whole lot of pedestrian vehicle interaction. In others, you have more pedestrians along the roadway, so it's a little bit of a different situation. So I will run through each of our school zones and kind of describe the physical boundaries of those. This is Morelands Elementary, 84th Avenue on the east side, 81st Avenue on the west, and 155th Street on the north. The red box there on the map kind of defines the focus area for our analysis, crosswalk of 84th. 84th Avenue is a collector with a 35-mile-an-hour daily speed limit and a traffic volume of approximately 2,500 vehicles per day. Morelands has flashing beacons on both 84th and 81st Avenues at the crosswalks, and there are some pedestrians that use the curb-protected walkway on 84th Avenue to access the school. Kenmore Elementary is set back a little ways, but is basically adjacent to 73rd Avenue. Again, the red box there kind of defines the main school zone. 73rd is an arterial with a 35-mile-an-hour daily speed limit and a volume of approximately 7,000 vehicles per day. There is an additional characteristic to this school zone that northeast 192nd Street, traffic coming from there and making a left southbound on 73rd turns right into the inbound section of this school zone. There are beacons on 73rd and also one that faces northeast 192nd to draw attention to the school zone speed limit. There are sidewalks on both sides of 73rd Avenue through this school zone, and they do get use from pedestrians accessing the school. Finally, Arrowhead Elementary, which is immediately adjacent to Juanita Drive, which is obviously an arterial with a 35-mile-an-hour daily speed limit. Juanita, at this point, has about 15,000 vehicles per day. The school crosswalk is actually at a signal intersection where Juanita Drive hits northeast 153rd Place and Arrowhead Drive. The school is kind of difficult to see for traffic coming down the hill on Juanita Drive, so northbound. It's behind some trees and down in a little valley, but there is good sight to the crosswalk in that direction. Coming the other way, for southbound traffic, there is a bit of a hillside and a curve approaching the crosswalk. And there are very few pedestrians that actually walk along Juanita Drive. There's not a whole lot of destinations or facilities for students. A lot more of the pedestrian traffic is on Arrowhead Drive and 153rd Street, 153rd Place. So in analyzing the operating conditions for pedestrians and vehicles in all the school zones, one of the first things that we found is we've had 0 collisions in 15 years of data, which is a definite positive. It's a great history and compliments to the Kenmore Police Department for helping to create that situation. So this is during active school zone times. We have 0 collisions, vehicle, pedestrian, vehicle, cyclist, none of the categories. So that's a really good thing. We've had a very low rate of citizen comments. It averages out to about 1 per year over the last 15 years. But the majority of those comments are actually related to the signage. A lot of the earlier ones were requesting for beacons to be installed, which all of the elementary school zones now have those beacons. For vehicle speeds, we had data on some of these roads, but not in the exact location of the school zones. So considering the inbound and outbound sections and the need to be precise to the school zone times, additional field data was collected in each of the school zones. So unfortunately, there is no handbook of engineering which says that if you have conditions A, B, and C, you use these tools to help address your concerns in a school zone. So we came up with a methodology to analyze the conditions. As I said, data was obtained in each of the school zones. We're focusing on the high priority inbound section for each school zone. And we're also making sure to look at the other ways that vehicles and pedestrians interact in each of our school zones. And then if needed, we will look at tools that could be used to address any concerns that we see in the data. So the automated black tube counters that you may have seen out there were placed in the inbound and outbound zones for 1 week period each in June and September of this past year. So I had data in the inbound and outbound zone for each. Only looked at the active school zone times, which is about 15 to 20 minutes around the morning bell, with a couple minutes after the actual bell for kids that are arriving a little late, and only about 5 to 10 minutes around the afternoon bell. Arrowhead has the longest duration. Kenmore Elementary, the crossing, it might only be 1 crossing of kids, and then they're dispersed, and that's pretty much it as far as kids being present. So some of the results of the analysis, the inbound section speeds tended to be lower than the outbound in all 3 school zones. I think drivers tend to accelerate to resume normal speed before the end of the school zones, and there's also less contact with the kids once they're past the crosswalk, especially on Juanita Drive. They just don't see the kids next to the road through the end of the school zone. Another trend in all 3 school zones is that the morning speeds were lower than the afternoon. Again, I think this relates to the presence of children in the school zone. As I said, at Kenmore Elementary, you only have 1 crossing, and then the kids are kind of off into the sidewalks. At Arrowhead on Juanita Drive, you might have 2 or 3 crossings, and then that's pretty much it for the kids. They're released at 1 bell rather than kind of staggering in the mornings and a couple of kids that might be late.
Staggering in.
Staggered as in frequency. I don't know, they might be half asleep.
Good clarification.
Okay, so Juanita Drive had the highest average inbound speed. We looked at the 85th percentile speed just because it's kind of a common engineering milestone, I guess you'd say. Also looked at the 95th percentile speed because of this being a school zone, just to see where we were in each. There were some inbound zone speeds which measured higher than 26 on Juanita Drive in the data that I took, but there were also 2 of those measurements that were lower than 26. Had one as low as 23 miles per hour. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and it averages out to about 26 miles per hour. Morelands and Kenmore Elementary, the speed data was very low. In some cases, the 85th percentile was actually below 20 miles an hour. So we have very acceptable speeds in those school zones. Juanita has a number of other physical safety factors, with the signal being there and the crosswalks. So some of the changes we've made to the signal phasing and turn restrictions, and we've worked with the crossing guard there, and I'll touch on those again in a couple of slides. So the city has continually been looking for opportunities to increase safety in school zones using our traditional 3 E's. For example, at Juanita Drive, I've worked with the crossing guard to help increase her visibility and how she uses her student helpers in the roadway or next to the roadway, as the case may be. The police have a rotating schedule of enforcement that they keep up between all the elementary schools, looking at all 3. And then, as I said, we've made modifications to the signal and some of the signing, especially on Juanita Drive, to help separate crossing pedestrians from that north-south Juanita Drive traffic. Some other examples of our use of the toolbox. In 2014, all the RFBs that went in our crosswalks, one of those is on 73rd in a school zone. And then there are 3 others on 81st, 155th, and 153rd Place, which are very close to school zones, although not actually within a legal school zone. And then the modifications of the signal at Juanita, 153rd, and Arrowhead. That signal now has a pedestrian-only phase, so when the walk signal is active for students crossing Juanita Drive, nobody is moving, nobody has a green light, and there is also a no right on red restriction for Arrowhead Drive, so there are no vehicles crossing the crosswalk while the students are in the crosswalk. In addition, the phase that the pedestrians cross in is after Arrowhead Drive. That's the schematic you can see, so the north-south traffic on Juanita has the green. They stop, and then Arrowhead has the green. They stop, and then the pedestrians go. So you're separated by the Arrowhead Drive traffic before the pedestrians even get out there. And then at the end of that phase, if a kid's trying to grab the end of the walk signal, it's actually 153rd that goes next, and not that north-south Juanita Drive traffic. So there's a lot of separation there in terms of time from when there's north-south traffic moving and when there's pedestrians in the crosswalk. Another thing that we have coming online in 2016 is we'll have another half-time officer doing traffic enforcement. He's going to be focusing on our school zones, especially Juanita Drive.
May I add one thing?
Please do.
So I would like to stress that all the changes that were made at the signal by Arrowhead were possible because we did a traffic controller upgrade. So those things weren't technically possible before. So we overhauled the signal, gave it a new controller, and Brett has a lot more flexibility for timing and the ped phases and the signage. So it's a very cool thing.
Very cool thing.
So with all of these factors considered, the operating conditions, the signal characteristics, the 3 of us here feel that there's a good balance in all of Kenmore's school zones of operating conditions, especially with the changes that we've made at the Juanita Drive signal. We're going to continue to monitor the school zones, put out the speed tubes and check our inbound section speeds and our outbound section speeds. And we'll take advantage of opportunities for future incremental improvements, such as further signal tweaks and signing changes. So I do want to say a couple of words about our research into automated cameras, which were recommended by the Ad Hoc Bike and Ped Committee in 2014. The short story is that they do work, but they are a tool for our toolbox, and they're now in our list of things that we can use in school zones if they're needed. So just a quick review of how they work. They are set up and operated by a third-party vendor that the city contracts with. This vendor does the primary collection of video or photographs of vehicles which have been by radar clocked to exceed the set limit. This evidence is sent to the police, and Kenmore police review and approve fines based on this video footage. And King County District Court collects those fines and also follows up on any non-payment and contested fines. The fines themselves do differ from traditional enforcement. They are set by the maximum parking violation, and they are not a moving violation. So the fines are actually issued to the registered vehicle owner and not the driver. Regionally, a number of cities do operate camera programs. Seattle, Bellevue, and Lake Forest Park continue to operate their programs to this day. Auburn and Redmond have ended their contracts with the third-party vendors that operated their camera programs. Research shows that automated cameras do work to lower speed and reduce collision rates. The speed reduction is limited by the enforceable limits that the vendor sets for the cameras, and they work with our police department to figure out what that limit would be for Kenmore. There are drawbacks to consider if we did want to use cameras as a tool in our school zones. And then something we need to look at is what our objective would be if we were to use cameras. Our collision rate is already 0 over 15 years, and vehicle speeds are quite low, especially considering the other operating characteristics of our school zones. So again, we feel that there's a good balance in all of our school zones. We will continue to monitor and make incremental improvements. We have a new tool in our toolbox, but we don't see anything in the data or the operations of our school zones at this time that warrants significant changes. So if you have any questions.
Councilmember Curtis.
I have a question that I know has no answer, but it concerns the sign that says "When Children Present." And when I sometimes go through, there are no children that I see. But I know what it really means. The children are in those buildings. And I know we can't change the signage, but it seems if it said something like during school hours or something like that would be actually more accurate than when children are present. Because the school zones are enforced even when there are no children.
Well, the school zone technically is enforced 24 hours a day, if you looked at the law. However, when we first started, we sat down with the judges, and the judges said, there's no way we're going to ever allow you to enforce it 24/7. So the best thing we came up with is when children are present. I am not going to sit there and enforce a speed limit for somebody when there's no children there and they're all safely tucked away in a building. That wouldn't be fair to the motorists. So that's why we have the school zones around the times when the children are coming and going from school. So it's you'll see the flashing signs that says speed limit 20 when flashing or when children are present. So it alerts the motorists that either or, but my direction to my officers is the kids are going to be out there.
Oh, that's interesting. I contributed to the Monroe program, and there were no children present. But it was easier to pay the fine than to contest it. So thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Councilmember Danuski.
I just have a comment, really, is that I think our police do an excellent job enforcing our school zones. And one other thing, other than just keeping the speeds low, that's kind of important about that is the community aspect, where you get the education if somebody gets pulled over, and you also you have all these kids who are coming by and they see them there all the time and they're waving to the police and the police are waving back. So it's just a really nice community feel having the police out there. So thank you.
Councilmember Herbig.
So until you said something, I had always assumed that school zones could only be around elementary schools, but then you mentioned that was under the King County Code, and so I did look up the RCW, and there doesn't appear to be any sort of restriction on what schools are actually even playgrounds we can put these sorts of lowered speed limits around. And with the work that we're doing around Kenmore Junior High, and over the weekend I was talking to a parent of a new Inglemore high school student who's having issues walking to school along Simons. I think it might be worth exploring, at least until we have better pedestrian facilities on both, looking at putting school zones, especially 202nd is kind of it's a blind corner. There's a lot of issues there with kids walking to school. But I think it might be worth exploring, expanding our school zones to outside of just the junior highs, because frankly, you probably have a lot more walkers anyway at the high school and junior high level than we do in K-6. Just a comment. Other than that, I want to say I think this is a really thorough You did some really thorough work, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
And there are actually school zones signs around the crosswalk on 202nd.
Cool.
So they just don't have the flasher.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I like what you've done at Arrowhead, the revisions in the intersection, and the fact that we'll have another officer patrolling the school zones. And I understand he's another motorcycle officer. Is that right?
Yes, we officially started today. He's not here quite yet, but we brought on, what we did is we took one of our patrol positions and we made that a part-time patrol, part-time motor officer position. Okay. So it would allow us to bring the motorcycle in, which is a much more effective tool and easier to make the enforcement a little easier than a big old patrol car sitting out there. So with that, the motorcycle officer, the direction I will give him is when he's out enforcing traffic enforcement on the days that we set up, he will be like the rest of us, will always hit those school zones. So, yeah.
And when Brett and I were in Brent, you were there, weren't you, the other day? And Tracy, we were talking about the intermittent enforcement. In other words, if you're there on different days and visible on different days, then they never know when the officer will be there, especially a motorcycle officer. He's visible when he's out stopping somebody, but you never know. When you see a motorcycle police officer at a location, you never know when you don't see him. And so there's a negative, or there's a psychological or a reminder there, regardless of whether the officer's there or not, because he might be and you may not see him. So, but intermittent, not necessarily on a regular basis, not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at one school, and Thursday, Friday, whatever,
Yeah, and the way it goes now, it just depends on the dispatch calls for service. When the school zones, we try to make it daily, but we know that it just doesn't happen like that. So it's not set up to where we say, okay, you're going to be here Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at this school zone. It's just we try to hit them all, and sometimes we are there and sometimes we're not. Yeah. But we're not. I would not like to think that we're that predictable, with the exception of Kenmore Elementary, because I stop there every day when I come to work, and I help enforce that. So that's one of my things I do on the way to work. So I would guarantee to say that every day you're going to see an officer up at that school zone.
Too. That's better.
But the rest of them are going to be kind of intermittent.
It's always a negative reinforcement.
And there is a staggered start time between the schools. Arrowhead starts later than the other ones, so there's a possibility to actually enforce it both schools with one officer.
Councilmember Sperry.
I'm just going to say thank you. I really appreciate the report and the update, and you've done a lot of work. And I know that it's already been said, but particularly what you've done at the Arrowhead Elementary, I really appreciate that, the upgrading the signal and creating that separation between the children and the cars is really important.
Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
That was exactly what I was going to say.
Your Honor, last summer, Kathy Beckett, a graduate intern, did a lot of work for us. And Kathy, if you're watching, thank you. You did a good job. Your work has resulted in tonight's meeting, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Anything else? So we need a motion to approve the recommendations.
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. This one is pretty straightforward. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The recommendations stand approved unanimously.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
I would like to say one final thing, if I may.
Certainly.
We did send a brief update to our ad hoc pedestrian and bicycle committee just to tell them kind of what we've been up to. And I want to thank Katrina Rose for coming tonight.
Yes.
I appreciate that, and for her guidance on the program. Just wanted to let you know she was here.
No, I had noticed her back there, and I thought she was there because she's on the committee with the school board, but or with the school system. So we're glad that you're here. So thank you. All right. Next item then is
Staff report.
Staff report, Mr. Carlin Z.
Thank you. One thing I just want to clarify on regarding the milfoil aquatic weed discussion is we are going to try to move forward with an herbicide treatment this summer. More to come, but that was the main message that I hope you heard, and just want to make sure there was consensus on that. And then the February 29th special meeting, talked to the school superintendent about having a joint meeting with the school board and the city council on February 29th. They're willing to have that meeting, but only 2 and possibly 3 board members would be able to attend, and the superintendent would be able to attend. He said he's still willing to meet and think we should have the meeting. He does have lots of good updates to give, and we have updates to give them, so he thinks there'll be a good back and forth. One of our own board members, school board members, Ken Smith, won't be able to make it because he teaches on Monday nights. So he's one of the 2 or 3 that won't be able to make it. Also that same night will be the open house for 62nd Avenue improvements. The plan is to have the open house in the community room, and then we'd have our council meeting here. And I don't think they're both going to start at 7. I'll double check that, but I think if you wanted to attend both, you could probably still attend the open house at 6 or 6:30 and still be able to be part of the city council meeting at 7 o'clock with the school board. Any objections to having that meeting on the 29th? Is that okay? You still want to have it? Okay.
Yep.
All right. And then, so I'll tell the school superintendent that that's what we're going to do. Also, a while back, we had a massive public records request. There was a citizen, not a citizen of Kenmore, but they wanted all of our public records, period. And we weren't the only city that person requested. Other cities in the region were given the same request by the same individual. I just learned today that request has been withdrawn. So that's kind of a relief. So last but not least, I do not see a strong need to have one-on-ones this week. If any of you see a need, I'm happy to still have those. But if not, maybe we can not have those except for the 2 o'clock Wednesday one-on-one. I was just getting a hairy eyeball from the mayor. So, yeah, unless you see a big, strong need to meet, we'll not have the one-on-ones this week. And that's all I have.
Wonderful. Comments, reports, initiatives. I see we got rid of initiatives. Comments and reports. Councilmember Danuski.
Oh my gosh, I'm going the other way. Last week I spoke at an event at St. Vincent de Paul. Once again, they're helping out our community. They've got a kiosk in their store now, partnering with a group called Interconnection to give very low-cost computers and technology to anybody who wants to buy it there, and also a lot of free computer classes. So it's a really neat program that's just started there.
Thank you very much for doing that. Councilmember Herbig.
Nothing to add.
Councilmember Curtis.
Nothing to add.
Councilmember Sperry.
Nothing at this time.
Councilmember Smith.
Nothing to add, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
I, as usual, have a couple of things. So we have a citizen in our community that needs help, our help. It's a pretty compelling story, and it would basically allow us to go to our federal delegation and seek support. The gentleman's name is Bevan Thapa and his wife Tomomi. They're currently living in Kenmore, after having to leave their home in Nepal due to an earthquake. They have 3 children who are natural-born U.S. citizens that currently attend Kenmore Elementary in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades, and they're thriving. The wife had to go to Japan this summer to take care of her ailing mother. She was denied a visa to come back. This mother has now been without her children for over 3 months. The husband has been caring for the 3 children while working 2 jobs. He's a little burned out. The children are showing symptoms of toxic stress and really need to be reunited with their mother. And there's anything, we are suggesting writing a letter on city letterhead and forwarding it to Representative Del Bene, Congresswoman Del Bene, and our 2 senators. And I was going to follow up with phone calls. So, Councilmember Danuski, please.
I think
help
you just
me out here.
I think you just read my letter, right?
I did.
So no, you covered it. You know, if we can help get this mother back with their family, they just lost everything that they have. You know, they're at the bottom of the barrel, and they need a little help. So
they're part of the Kenmore Elementary school system, and they certainly need support. So if there's not any objections, we're going to go ahead and write a letter, and we're going to visit with them tomorrow night and use it on city letterhead and get a hold by phone of some of our delegation to see if we can get some help as soon as possible. So thank you for that. Let's see. The other stuff. Thursday, I'm down at the Governor's with a couple of other people from Sound Cities for breakfast, and we're followed with numerous meetings throughout the day with legislators and kids from the Pocock Foundation talking about the boathouse at Rhododendron Park. Last week I had a bunch of meetings with legislators about St. Ed's and about the ball fields, and also I testified at 2 committee, 1 House, 1 Senate committee meetings on the House Bill 2667 and the Senate Bill 6377 on St. Ed's, dealing with voting and all of the necessary housekeeping to sort of make this thing happen. So with that,
Your Honor,
yes.
Did you mention the ferry meeting?
No, that's tomorrow. There's a county council meeting tomorrow, the Ferry District, and so the assistant city manager and I are going down to show support for the city of Kenmore. So with that, we're adjourned.
Efficient. Question that.
Yeah.
Parking that driving through the schools that I want to how they said I got some. Well, the lights were flashing. No, they weren't.
Oh.
They had it was the camera.
Okay. If I don't do this, they give it back to me.
That would be weird.
So I got to make sure I crumple it up. That way they won't give it back to me.
But I've always wondered about it. Because I always thought they meant if the president
go through a back room.
Get by with that. No, I've always. I don't know.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, you will.
But now we know it's enforceable 24 hours a day. They felt like it. Yeah, when I read the RC, didn't do anything about it. No, I agree. Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges